and welcome. What was I thinking? Why did I make that decision? Those are questions that we've all asked ourselves at some point or another. So, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at 4 questions that we can ask ourselves when we're in that decision-making process. And hopefully, the answers to those 4 questions are going to help us to make better decisions.
Hey, it's great that you've joined us today. You've picked a good week as it's the first in our new series entitled 4 Questions for Better Decisions. But today is not really for a general church congregation. Today is for you. And I would love it if you could pull up a comfy seat, make a coffee, and let us sit for the next 10 minutes or so and have a chat, a conversation about decision making. Because here's what I know, our lives are shaped by the decisions that we make. You are where you are for the most part because of decisions you've made. And some of your greatest joys, but also some of your greatest regrets, are connected to decisions you've made. And like me, you can probably think of a few decisions you would like to go back and unmake. Now, the thing that makes decision making so tricky is that our big decisions, the ones that really determine the trajectory of our lives, well, they are rarely made in emotionally neutral environments, are they? And if we are honest, it's our emotions that often get us into trouble. For example, have you ever made a really bad relationship decision? We've convinced ourselves that it seems right or that we're in love. Friends try to warn us, but we assure them that we know what we're doing. And looking back, we think, why did I do that? Why did I choose that path? Or perhaps you've made a really bad purchasing decision. We set our hearts on something and before we know it, we're handing over a card to pay for it, but we didn't really need it and we probably couldn't afford it. And then later on, we wonder why we did it. But there's another dynamic that makes decision making really difficult, and that's this. We never really know what hangs in the balance of the decisions that we make, do we? Perhaps life would have been different if we'd have taken that job, or if our parents hadn't split, or if we'd have chosen different friends. We never know, do we? We never know who or what hangs in the balance of the decisions we make. But what we do know is that private decisions often have public implications. And your private decisions probably won't stay private, and your personal decisions will impact others, especially if you have children or plan to have children. So in this series, we are going to think about 4 questions to ask ourselves whenever we have a big decision to make, big or small. And these 4 questions will actually empower us to live a better life and make better decisions and live with fewer regrets. So here we go. Question number 1. And honestly, this is the most difficult question to ask when making a decision. Am I being honest with myself? And to feel the full weight of this question, we need to add another word. Am I being honest with myself really? And here's why this is such an important question. Our emotions will convince us that even a bad decision's a right one. I think that we're all excellent salespeople and we can sell ourselves anything, even stuff that's not good for us or stuff that will harm us. You see, we all have the tendency to look for arguments that support what we really want or plan to do. In other words, we see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear, we believe what we want to believe, and anything to the contrary, well, we just tune it out. We talk ourselves into things that we can't easily get out of. Let's think about 3 examples. Dumb purchasing decisions. How many people buy the sporty car because it looks great, but actually you can't get the grocery shopping in the boot and the back seat is too cramped for grandma to get in? Or how about doomed relationships? How many have dated somebody we knew wasn't good for us? Or how many of us have friends that somehow take us down a track we don't really want to go? Or what about destructive habits? We convince ourselves that we can handle this, that we will be in control. I want to be healthy, but how many times do I eat something that is unhealthy because I've told myself I deserve it, or I've worked hard, or I'll run tomorrow, and then tuck into chocolate cake? When we start selling ourselves on something, that is the time to hit the pause button and ask the question, am I being completely honest with myself really? You see, we rarely have to sell ourselves onto a good idea, on what's the right thing, the healthy thing, the responsible thing to do. And I think what happens is that our hearts get all wrapped up in something, someone, some plan, and our heart sends a message to the brain and says, hey brain, I want this, figure out a way to help me get it. Now, our brains are really smart. I mean, that's why we call them brains. And our brains know that it's difficult to justify a want, but it's easy to justify a need. So the first thing the brain does is it begins to upgrade. It moves us from a want to a need. And before long, we have a whole lot of reasons why we can buy it, ask it out, drink, stay, leave, lie. And once this starts, it's so hard to be honest with ourselves. So do you want to be healthy? Well, of course you do. We all do. And yet we all decide to the contrary almost every time we sit down to eat. Do you want to be healthy financially and relationally? Of course you do. We all do. But why are we so prone to decide in the opposite direction? Why is self-control so difficult for us? I think the best explanation for this confusing reality comes from the lips of an ancient prophet named Jeremiah. Now, if you're not a Bible person or a church person, no problem. I'm not asking you to believe the whole Bible. I just want you to consider one statement from a man who worked as an advisor to several ancient kings. Kings whose lives would have been much better if they'd have listened to this one bit of advice. Jeremiah was a prophet in Israel around 600 BC, and he served as God's mouthpiece to several of Israel's kings. And time after time, he would warn them of the dangers of breaking Israel's relationship with God. And time after time, the kings would just ignore Jeremiah's advice. They would talk themselves into making the most foolish decisions, and of course, with the same outcome over and over. For example, take young King Jehoiakim. He decided it would be a good idea to lead the nation of Israel against Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. That's a bit like the village of Kinloss deciding to declare war on the United States of America. It's crazy. So Jeremiah comes to the king and warns him that it's a bad idea. But Jehoiakim has sold himself on his idea and there was no turning back. So he moved ahead, and of course Nebuchadnezzar did exactly what Jeremiah predicted he would do. He invaded the land, he invaded Jerusalem, and he took Jehoiakim off the throne and replaced him with a new king, Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiakim back to Babylon and added him to his king collection. Yeah, literally he collected living kings. Some people collect stamps and coins, but Nebuchadnezzar collected kings. And every time he conquered a nation, he would come home with his new king for his collection. And then on special occasions when he wanted to show off and remind everyone how powerful he was, he would bring out all the kings in their chains and parade them around. And each king would walk with his hand on the shoulder of the king in front of him, because in addition to being in chains, King Nebuchadnezzar had them all blinded. Anyway, no sooner had King Nebuchadnezzar headed back to Babylon when the new king, Zedekiah, decides to do the very same thing that Jehoiakim did. Jeremiah pleads with him. He says, Hezekiah, don't do this. It's going to result in the destruction of the city and your family. But you know kings, they won't be told what to do. And Zedekiah puts Jeremiah into a dry cistern to get him out of the way. Nebuchadnezzar returns to Jerusalem and laid siege to the city and starves all the Jews into submission. Towards the end of the siege, Zedekiah attempts to escape with his family, but is captured and then forced to watch as his children and entire family are cut down by Nebuchadnezzar's guards. And that would be the last thing that Zedekiah would ever see. He was blinded, wrapped in chains, and paraded off to Babylon to join the king collection. Now, when you hear a story like that, you can't help but wonder why, oh why, did they not listen? Why would they not learn from those who went before? Well, it was actually during Jeremiah's interaction with Zedekiah that the prophet penned the words that help explain why all of us are so prone to self-deception, why we sell ourselves on really bad ideas. Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things. There it is. Now, they may not be encouraging words that we were hoping for. I mean, it's pretty hard, isn't it? But Jeremiah goes on to say, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Boy, this isn't encouraging, is it? It means it's a permanent condition. It means we're going to have to take permanent action to keep from being deceived by our own hearts. But still, Jeremiah's not through. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? We might read those ancient kings and think, what were they thinking? How can they be so smart and yet so deceived all at the same time? But now we know. They suffer from the same heart condition as you and me. Our hearts are deceitful above all things. Now that sounds pretty hopeless, doesn't it? I mean, if there's no cure, what's the point of even trying? Well, it's true there's no cure, but there is a way forward. There's a way to keep our deceitful hearts in check. Simply put, you need to have a little heart-to-heart with you. You need to tell yourself the truth, really. You see, it's important for us to push through the discomfort of this question, to ask ourselves why we're feeling what we're feeling and why we want to do what we want to do. And if we do, we'll get somewhere near to the truth. And the trouble is that telling ourselves the truth can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. Jesus actually made a very powerful statement in this regard. He said that the truth will set you free. And the truth really will set us free. But the opposite is also true. Dishonesty has the potential to imprison us. So telling ourselves the truth, owning up to the real reasons we're considering whatever it is we're considering, will bring immediate clarity. We will see it better and it will be harder to deceive ourselves. And in this way, telling ourselves the truth, well, it will help us to make the right decision. And that's why it's such an important question to ask whenever we are making a big or small decision. Am I being honest with myself really? Am I telling myself the truth or selling myself a regret? Throughout our lives, we're going to be forced to make decisions we don't want to make, and all of them will be made in some sort of emotional context. We will be prone to opt for happy over healthy or pleasure over self-control because our hearts are deceitful. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to continue to be that way. There is a way out. So will you take a baby step? Will you start by being brutally, terrifyingly honest with yourself? Will you quit lying to yourself? Will you refuse to make up reasons that are actually justifications? And will you catch yourself, pause, have a little heart to heart and say, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this really? Will you partner with God in your decision making? Will you pause before you decide and ask God to help you and guide you and give you wisdom? Because it turns out that Jeremiah was right, wasn't he? The heart is deceitful above all things and is beyond cure. But we know what to do and what to ask ourselves.
Brilliant, Judith. Thank you so much. That was great. So we now know what to ask ourselves before we make a decision, rather than asking, what was I thinking after we've made a dumb or doomed or damaging decision? We can ask ourselves before, am I being honest with myself? Really? Am I really being honest with myself, or is my heart trying to deceive me? That is so brilliant and so doable. And I hope you can join us again next week when we're going to be looking at the second of these questions that is hopefully going to help you and help me to make better decisions. So in the meantime, remember and put it into practice. Am I being honest with myself? Really? Bye for now.